What's up, guys? Welcome to a new episode of the ynggpodcast. And the first time that we're actually doing this, all three of us together, we're going to be ranking and giving our season predictions of the Atlantic Division. The first division that we're going to be starting off with, we're going to be doing this with the three other divisions. So there's going to be a total of 4 division videos. And we're going to be giving our predictions. There's going to be a couple of debates here and there throughout the video. And we're going to be talking about the offseason moves that were made. So the subtractions, the key arrivals, and also do we think that teams are going to surprise or take a step back? So starting off with the first team, the Boston Bruins. So this team had 2 key departures in their captain, Patrice Bergeron and David Krejci, which so happened to be their first and second line centermen. But they do have a couple of key arrivals. They get Boston alumni Milan Lucic back, but 1 year at 1 million. He is not the same Lucic he once was when they won the Stanley Cup and during their, dynasty days. He's far removed from that, and honestly, he's going to provide some depth. He's still capable of, fighting and using his grit to get into some dirty areas and put the puck in the net a couple of times. But the 2 other additions that they make here is James Van Riemsdyk out 1 year, 1 million. He's a guy that really fell off the last couple of years. Not the same elite sniper he once was with the Toronto Maple Leafs. So maybe he could find his groove with the Boston Bruins this season. And then also Kevin Shattenkirk, a veteran, a seasoned defenseman that they add for 1 year at $1.05 million. He's going to add some veteranship on an already strong Boston Bruins D line. And here, the key departures. The list is long and hefty. So Taylor Hall goes to Chicago. He's going to be playing Connor Bedard. Gareth Hathaway goes to Philly, playing a 4th-line role there. You also have Connor Clifton. You have Dmitry Orlov, who was a great fit for Boston after being traded during the trade deadline. You also had Tyler Bertuzzi, who goes to a rival team in Toronto Maple Leafs. He's a key departure. He fit very well at Boston. And obviously losing 2 greats in Bergeron and Krejci does not help whatsoever. And buying out Mike Riley is probably the best key departure here on this list. But the big question is, what will the Boston Bruins do in terms of trying to find a first and second line center? And can they still be a top dog in this division with all these key departures, especially losing a first and second line center in Bergeron and Krejci? Like, what's their move, moving forward? Maybe they're going to trade for somebody during the season if it doesn't work out. We have yet to see what's to come. But as of right now, their goaltending duo and Allmark and Swayman is intact, so that's perfect. The best duo in the league, in my opinion, in terms of goaltending, and they have one of the best defensive cores in the league as well. The problem is offense.
Yeah, and I think this is going to be an interesting season for the Boston Bruins because, like you mentioned, the departures of David Krejci and Patrice Bergeron, the latter retiring, and it's a big void that's filled. Obviously, Zaka had a great season last year, playing on the Czech line, and you have Charlie Coyle going back into a position that he filled during his time in Minnesota. But I don't think they're going to put expectations too high in Boston. But I think the expectation will still be to compete. And in terms of filling out their needs at the center position, I think they're just going to feel this one out and see if by the trade deadline, there's a move that could be made to add to the team if the team is in a clear playoff race. Other than that, this is a team that still has a tremendous decor, even after the departure of Dmitry Orlov, one of the best goaltending duos in the regular season in Jeremy Swayman and Olmark. So if I were to predict where they would fall in the standings in the Atlantic, they'd probably be, for me, a wild card team, but it all depends on if they're going to be buyers come deadline.
Yeah, and I think the one thing that's interesting about the Bruins too is like everybody had the same opinion last year. Like if you pay attention to a lot of the Bruins fans or even just people outside watching the Bruins, they were like, "Ah, we're unsure with the Bruins. They don't really have the depth." Like there wasn't a lot of optimism last year when they brought in Bergeron and Krejci, and there was a lot of doubt after they fired Bruce Cassidy. About what was going to happen with the Boston Bruins, and they ended up being the best team in the league. And I'm not saying that this is going to be a year where they're going to be the best team in the league, but I think they've made some good additions. I think if you look at their team, yes, I know Zaka is probably not a number one center, and I don't think anyone expects him to be. But I think for the Bruins, in terms of what they have, and considering the fact that they still have Pasternak, they still have Marchand, they added guys like Van Riemsdyk and Coyle, who I think are still decent players. This is a team that could easily still be in the playoff running. I mean, you're talking about a guy like David Pasternak and Brad Marchand who haven't slowed down. I know that it's going to be tough. They don't have Bergeron and they don't have Krejci, but it's a team that I think is still well rounded on paper, and they have a very good decor, like just in general, that I think they're going to be fine. Like Coyle's good, Hampus Lindholm is good, Carlo and Grizzlick are fine. You know, Shattenkirk's not a bad depth guy. They got Ian Mitchell in the Taylor Hall trade, and they still have the reigning Vezina goaltender in Linus Olmark, and they also re-signed Jeremy Swayman. So for the Bruins, I mean, they have the team, they have the depth. It's just a matter of, is the fact, like you guys mentioned, is the fact that not having two, really good centers gonna take a toll on them? I think it will. I don't think they're gonna win 60 games like they did last year, but I don't think they're a wild card team. I think they're probably going to be within the top three of the Atlantic. I think the Bruins are still that good, and I think people are just sleeping on the Bruins. But I do think there is going to be a little bit of a regression in terms of just the points and where everybody finishes. But I think the Bruins are a playoff team. I'd be very surprised if they missed the playoffs, especially with how good their D and their goaltending is. Like I said.
And a couple of things I would like to add before we move on to the next team. Pavel Zacha, coming off a tremendous season with the Boston Bruins last year, he's going to be put in a position where they're going to heavily rely on him. So hopefully it's not a one season thing where he really like broke out and now he's going to go back to his old Zacha. I think he's going to continue building on what he built on last year. They did sign him to a contract extension, so there's high hopes there. I think here the most underrated signing here is Morgan Geekie. So I think he's a very underrated centerman. It allows Charlie Cole to go back into the second center position where he played while David Krejci was back in Czech Republic that one season that he wasn't with the Bruins. So I think that's going to be fine in terms of the second line position. I think it's really Zaka as the first line center. He's replacing arguably the best two-way center in the league. Someone who's been nominated or won the Selkie every single time in Patrice Bergeron. They should literally rename that trophy after him, after how many times he's been nominated or won that trophy. So there's big shoes to fill. And honestly, Zaka is not going to be Patrice Bergeron, but if he could do at least half the things that Bergeron did, I think they'll be fine. I have Boston in a wild card spot, unless again they prove everyone wrong like they did last year.
Yeah,
Okay,
Fair enough.
so let's move on to the next team. So we have
Buffalo
the
Sabres.
Buffalo Sabres. So key arrivals: Connor Clifton from the Boston Bruins and Eric Johnson, a veteran and seasoned defenseman, to add to a very young decor. And then key departures: Hino Stroza, Labushkin, and Craig Anderson, who retires. So not really the best off season. They didn't lose anybody either, so they didn't regress by any means. But they did sign a couple of players. They re-signed their captain Okposo and Gergensons and Jost as well. That they added last year, and rookies who could crack the lineup. Well, you know, I think we could also agree that Devin Lively will be their starting goaltender to start the season. But Matthew Savoie and Yuri Kulich are names to look at in my opinion, that could crack the team. But, just looking at the Buffalo Sabres, this is a very promising and very young team. We saw what they were capable of doing last year. Tage Thompson really broke out. This is a guy that's poised to get 50 goals at some point in his career. Just looking at this team, seeing Jeff Skinner finally back on track these last couple of seasons after being deemed not worth his contract, saying that he has probably one of the worst contracts. Now I think it's probably a fair contract in terms of his production, but just looking at everyone else, Dylan Cousins, Casey Middlestad, Jordan Greenway that they added at that deadline, Peyton Krebs, Victor Olofsson, like this is such a great team in terms of having seasoned veterans on this lineup. Obviously, they're playing a third and fourth line role. The guys that are older and the younger guys are being pushed into you know a higher position in the top six. A lot of younger guys that are going to be the future of the Buffalo Sabres and are the present core guys moving forward right now. And I think this team having Devin Lively starting the season as opposed to Craig Anderson, who was way past his prime. I think the Buffalo Sabres are going to be poised to make the playoffs this year. I'm not saying they will make the playoffs, but this to start off the season with a bona fide or elite or franchise goaltender in Levi, especially with this team on paper, I think they're in really, really, really good hands right here with Devin Lively moving forward. And I think their biggest problem last year was goaltending and probably defense. But I think adding guys like Eric Johnson and Connor Clifton, solidifies their defensive needs, especially when you have guys like Dahlin, Power, and Samuelson, who is a very, very underrated defenseman who they locked up last year.
I don't disagree with you with the fact that this team is very exciting and that Sabres fans should be excited about their core for years to come. If you go up to the forward lines, you could see that their top 9 center positions are pretty much locked up for the foreseeable future and multiple years ahead of that. And you got great winger depth for all 3 lines. And you have a two-headed monster on the back end. You have Rasmus Dahlin, and you have Owen Power, who in year 2 I expect to have a very potent season. He was very great, showed a lot of poise, puck moving ability as a rookie, and I just think he's going to take the next step this year. But all in all, can I say that this team has improved based on their player movements in the offseason? I don't think so. They add Connor Clifton and Eric Johnson. The latter, Eric Johnson, is somebody who's closer to retirement than being in the prime of his career. So I don't know how much he has left to give. And Connor Clifton hasn't necessarily lived up to the top 4 hype yet. So we'll see how their decor develops. That might be an issue for them. But like you mentioned prior, Devin Lively showed a lot of promise last year. And I think if they are to be a playoff team this coming season, it all depends on if he's going to be able to be a stabilizer for them in the net. And if I were to give my prediction now on how I see their positioning by the end of the regular season, I'd say that they're in the wild card mix till the end, but just miss out, because I don't think they've done enough to improve this team in the offseason. And I think that teams like Ottawa and teams like the Detroit Red Wings have gotten stronger, and the Pittsburgh Penguins, who missed out last year in the same conference, and I don't necessarily think that they have.
Okay, well, I mean, I agree with some of your points. I also don't agree with a lot of them too. I think Buffalo did improve. I think if you look at their roster and you look at their team from last year, one of the things that they struggled with last year was keeping the puck out of the net. They could score goals in bunches, but they weren't able to keep the puck out, and they had a lot of problems in net, and they had a lot of problems defensively. And I think they solidified that. You get a guy like Connor Clifton and Eric Johnson. I know Eric Johnson, like you mentioned, 35-year-old, probably closer to the end of his career than he is in his prime, but he's still a solid defenseman. He's won a Stanley Cup. He's been a leader. He's been a captain before. I think that's going to play a big role in a team like the Buffalo Sabres. And then you have Connor Clifton, who's still 28 years old. He's entering the prime of his career. I know it didn't really work out for him in Boston during the time that he was there, but he's still a decent defenseman. I think he can be a really good 5-6 for the Sabres. And so I think that's why, I think they've improved their decor compared to last year. They moved on from Ilya Lyubushkin. They have guys that I think are going to be able to come in and step in. And look, they still have Jacob Bryson and Henry Jokiharju, as well as Riley Stillman, who are also in that mix, as well in the top six. So it's not a terrible decor. I think it's a decor that it definitely improved compared to last year. And so I'm excited to see what happens there. And just, kind of touching up a little bit with the Buffalo Sabres as well. They have $7.8 million in cap space right now, and they're only going to generate more as the season goes on. This is a team that actually they have $8 million in cap space right now. But the thing is that what's interesting about them is that they could still add from now till the start of the season and even heading into to the trade deadline. And one guy that I think could be a really good, interesting piece for them if they were, if he does end up coming back at some point mid-season and the Sabres are in a playoff run, could be Patrick Kane. I think that's a guy that if you look at where the Sabres are at and where their forward core is, if you can add a guy like Patrick Kane to an already pretty good Buffalo Sabres team, I think that can really help them bolster their chances at making the playoffs, and having Patrick Kane come back home I think would be cool. But obviously for Buffalo, they have a lot of cap space. They're a young team. I'm not worried about them. I think Levi's going to take the reins this year. I'm curious to see who their backup is going to be. Luukkonen struggled in the time that he was there last year, and Comrie wasn't any better. So we're going to see which one is going to take the reins during preseason and potentially be the backup. But I think Buffalo, if Levi can play the way he played during the season that he was there, I think Buffalo will be fine. My prediction, I'm high on Buffalo. I know Chris is too. I'm gonna have Buffalo probably in the wild card, and so that leaves, in my opinion, we're gonna get into it after, but I have Buffalo. I think just edging it out as the final wild card spot. I think there's gonna be 5 teams in the Atlantic making the playoffs this year, and I think Buffalo is gonna be the last one to do it. So that's what I'm gonna say.
Yeah, the Atlantic is far superior compared to the Metropolitan. This upcoming season and probably for years to come, it's going to be very, very competitive. But we'll get into that
Yeah,
shortly. So moving on to the next team, we have the Detroit Red Wings, the probably the busiest team in terms of the Atlantic Division.
Zach's
They
favorite.
yeah, that's for sure. So they add a slew of players, literally
I love them.
reconstructed their defense and forwards lines. So you have JT Comfort, 5-year deal, $5.1 million. Yes, he had a really good season with Colorado last year, but in terms of the term, in terms of the salary per year, people are kind of not too crazy about it. So we have yet to see if that's going to work out long term. You have Alex DeBrincat, 4-year deal at 7.875 million. That's really good in terms of an elite sniper, even though they don't lock him up long term. 4 years is still good enough. Christian Fisher, very underrated. That piece right there, 1 year, 2.5 million. Clem Closton really found his footing with the Edmonton Oilers. It was really sad to see him go. He was a perfect fit there. He goes to Detroit for 2 years, 2 million. Daniel Sprong, very underrated secondary scoring winger for 1 year, 2 million. Shane Gostisbehere, 1 year, 125 million. Very underrated offensive defenseman that they add there. Really found this footing with the Arizona Coyotes. One of the most underrated defensemen in the last couple of years. Completely the opposite of what he was in Philly. He was very underwhelming there, but injuries did play a factor. And Justin Hull, a guy who was destroyed by Toronto media and Toronto fans the last couple of years. He signs a 3-year deal at 3.4 million with Detroit. A lot of people are not too happy with that signing either. You have Jeff Petrie, who they trade for 2 years, 2.34 million dollars. Will he bounce back from the last 2 seasons that he played? One with the Pittsburgh Penguins and the other one with the Montreal Canadiens. Can he, be that Jeff Petrie that he once was with the Montreal Canadiens a couple years ago? Alex Lyon had a very good stint with the Florida Panthers, helping them make the playoffs last year. He signs a 2-year deal. And you have James Reimer as well, who signs a 1-year deal. And key departures, you have Kubalik, who gets traded to Ottawa, part of the Alex DeBrincat trade. Pius Suter, who signs with Vancouver. Philip Zadina didn't really work out, so terminated the contract. Robert Haig, nothing great there. Gustav Lindstrom gets traded to Montreal, part of the Petrie deal. And yeah, and then Joe Veleno was re-signed. So a lot of movement in terms of Detroit. But, the biggest concern here is that there's a lot of players coming in. Will they have a strong start to the season? in terms of developing chemistry during training camp and during preseason games to start very hot at the start of the season, or will this a little bit of seasoning, and will this affect where they finish in the standings because of that? Honestly, I don't think they start off hot immediately. I think by the Christmas break is when they start finding their footing. I do believe Detroit Red Wings are going to be a dangerous team for years to come. But a lot of people are doubting the Yzer plan, and I'm not too crazy about the Yzer plan, but I do like that Yzerman went full out this season and knows that he has a very competitive team with guys like Lucas Raymond and Moritz Seider as the key pieces on that team for years to come. But you already have a goalie in Vil Husso, and now you're going to add two other goalies that that could potentially be NHL backups that are going to be duking it out. Andrew Kopp was not the best signing last year, and we don't know if he's going to bounce back this year. I think that was an overpayment in terms of signing him. But there's a lot of young players on this team that, will probably mesh well with the additions that they brought into the team. And you have David Perron as well, who is probably one of the most underrated wingers in the league, and he's proven that multiple times the last couple of years. Yes, he's been moved around a lot throughout his career, but it seems like he's going to be finishing his career with the Detroit Red Wings. And in terms of their defense, I'm not the biggest fan, to be honest with you. I think Ben Sherratt and Justin Holl are going to have to prove to a lot of people that they're capable of getting the job done. But, that Sherratt and Petrie pairing is basically the same pairing that they had in Montreal, and it worked until it didn't. So, I mean, I have Detroit um, in a wild card spot, to be honest, probably fighting Buffalo for that spot. Or unless the Boston Bruins, again, like I was saying before, if things don't work out because they don't have that first and second line center, um, you know, it's going to be a dogfight to the end in the Atlantic. I think it's going to be very, very tight.
So I will take over. Where I do agree with you is that I do think the Atlantic will be a dogfight to the end, but do I see Detroit being competitive? Absolutely not. If I were to make a prediction now, I think they would be closer in points to the Montreal Canadiens than they will to the last wildcard team that makes the playoffs. And you brought up a bunch of great points on some of the acquisitions they did make this offseason that guys that Yzerman brought in. Klim Kostin, I think, is a good value signing for them. Daniel Sprong off of a career year. But there's too many signings that are just so questionable. For instance, JT Compher signing for $5 million, boggling, especially since he's a bona fide third line center. Andrew Kopp, that's another big risk. And then if you scroll down to their decor, what's happening is they're putting a lot of pressure on Moritz Seider to basically be relied on when in all the crucial situations. I know that Jeff Petrie had a down year last year. Yes, he's still able, in my mind, to be a top four defenseman, and they get Montreal retaining half of the salary for the next 2 years. But I look at that decor, and I don't think it's enough. I think Shane Gossesbury has his moments, but I think he's also a risk. Justin Holl, that is a terrible contract when you look at the term. And if you just look at their team overall, there's just not a lot of spectacular. I know Alex DeBrincat, given the chance to play on the top line with a Lucas Raymond and a Dylan Larkin, I think he'll be back to his 35 to 40 goal ways. But I just think in terms of depth in elite playmakers, this team is just not there yet. They do have the assets and the draft capital to get there at some point, but if I could only judge what I see at the moment, and add on to the fact that their goaltending is bang average with Ville Husso, James Reimer, and Alex Lyon, I don't see this as a team that will be making the playoffs this year. And I know Detroit fans in the comment section won't be too happy about this, but this is my honest take on how they'll end up after this season.
Yeah, I'm gonna just say this right now, guys. Detroit's ass. Like, I don't even want to be disrespectful. I really don't,
Oh,
bro. Like,
man,
look. I'm not trying to like start any controversy, but like, they haven't done anything spectacular. They really haven't. Like, the Bricket's the only good signing. Comfort, meh. Sprong, meh. Costin, yeah, good fourth line guy, whatever. Fisher, same thing. But like, their decor sucks. Like, flat out sucks. Just Ben Sherratt, no. Petrie, we'll see. We'll see how that turns out. I know he's back home. Okay, maybe. And then you have like Gostisbehere, offensively great, defensively no. And then don't even get me started with Justin Hall. Like just no. So I don't know what Eiserman's trying to do. I don't think he improved his team. I think Detroit just added a bunch of guys. And I mean, when you play a team game, you need to have chemistry. I don't think Detroit's gonna have any. It's gonna be another slow year for Detroit fans. And listen, if you're relying on Ville Husso to be a guy that's gonna bail you out, I like Husso. I think he's a good goalie. I don't think he's a guy that can win you enough games to get you into a playoff spot. And with the Atlantic and with the amount of teams that are there and with how good the Atlantic is, Detroit has basically no chance. So to me, I have them actually kind of in the same position as Zach. I have them seventh. I have them just ahead of Montreal. And that's being generous because I think Montreal's team, which we're going to get to after, but I think Montreal could actually compete with this team. But that's my own opinion on it. But just in general, I think Detroit's going to finish seventh, uh, nowhere near the wild card spot. They're going to be one of the worst teams in the Atlantic and probably where they're supposed to be. But at the end of the day, listen, I don't think Eiserman's done a good job, and I hope he proves me wrong. I really do, but I'm not too convinced with this team. I'm sorry, Detroit fans. You can hate me in the comments, but if you look at this team, there's nothing that wows me apart from that top line. That's it.
I think I'm torn, torn between like the good signings and the bad signings here because I feel like they're balanced, and like you look at like the good stuff, right? There's Jeff Petrie, who's a top four defenseman. I think he's gonna fit perfectly in his role with the Detroit Red Wings. I think he's going to help out in terms of the offensive production, in terms of the power play. Then you look at Alex DeBrincat. They finally get an elite sniper, and he's from Detroit as well. So I think that's going to help out. Then Klim Kostin and Daniel Sprong, very underrated signings. And then followed by that, you have JT Comfer, which I'm not crazy about at all. Is Andrew Kopp gonna bounce back and be decent like he was with the Winnipeg
No.
Jets? I don't know.
May I chime in?
Yeah.
I just wanted to point out the fact that they did make these good signings, like in Alex DeBrincat, for example, and others, but they did lose Tyler Bertuzzi and Philip Hronik. And do you think that with the signings they made, that they are improvements over the guys that they lost?
No.
I would. Hronik is a big loss in my opinion, but the return was pretty good for them. And I would say that Tyler Bertuzzi is being replaced by Alex DeBrincat. So, I guess time will tell, right? And they have a lot of good prospects in the pipeline that, which is another questionable thing because these guys are like almost ready. They're not quite ready, but they're almost ready. And now you're bringing guys on long-term contracts that they're gonna have to be battling with for years to come to make the roster. Like I don't know, man. That's
Dude,
a little bit of the questionable part for me. And also, I would say that there's a lot of what ifs. Is this guy gonna repeat what he did last year? Is this guy gonna bounce back? And that's why I say that they're gonna be battling for a wild card spot. Does not mean they're guaranteed for a wild card spot. Doesn't mean they're guaranteed for a playoff spot in general. They'll be battling, meaning they'll be like the Buffalo Sabres and the
no,
Boston Bruins.
no, they
At
won't.
one point in the season, they will be in
No,
a wild card spot, but I
no.
ultimately believe that the Boston Bruins and Buffalo Sabres do have better teams on paper. They have better coaching staff, and they have a good mesh of young guys and veterans on that team. Whereas this team, there's a lot of plugins. There's a lot of young guys that are going to be there for the future. There's a lot of key signings that they're towards the end of their career. There's guys that are they're probably in the prime of their career, like Dylan Larkin and Alex DeBrincat. there's too many things going on in Detroit. So as of right now, I have them as a question mark, and that's why I have them classified as battling for a playoff spot.
Dude, all three. I'm telling you right now. Apart from their top line, their top three lines would be third or fourth lines in any other NHL team. That's being generous, okay? And when you have your second line is basically a third line, your third line is a third line, and your fourth line's a fourth line. Like, dude, they're not good enough. Their top six is not good enough. Their decor is definitely not good enough, and their goaltending is not good enough. They're not a team that's going to compete. They might win a
Well,
couple of games here and there. They might steal you a couple of games here and there, but they're not
and
going to
that
compete. They're not anywhere
that kind
near
of,
the
not
playoffs.
to cut you off, but it's that kind of depth that cost them last year. They had a
Yeah,
great start to the season. Don't get me wrong. First 10 games, first 15 games, they're on fire. Let's go. But
yeah,
post January, this team really fell off, and by the end of the season, they were almost a bottom feeder. I hate to say it,
agreed.
but this is, I don't I don't know how much faith there is now in Steve Eiserman's plan. It's because it's Steve Eiserman. You're like, and it's his baby. You're like, be patient, be patient. But right now, it's not giving. And I think there's going to have to be some more significant moves down the stretch for this team to be more competitive.
Let's move on to Florida because I want to get into that because we talked about this privately on the phone, and I have some strong opinions about the Florida Panthers that are coming up next. But if you look at their team, obviously, just in terms of everything that they did, they added a few guys. Nothing big, but they made some depth signings. They added guys like Oliver Ekman-Larsson, Dmitry Kulikov, Rasmus Asplund, Steven Lorentz, Evan Rodriguez as well, Nico Mikkola, Mike Riley. So they added a lot of depth to their team, which is something I think they lacked over the last couple of years. And obviously, that's going to help them in terms of just depth and battling for a playoff spot. But at the same time, they also did lose some key guys. They lost Anthony Duclair, Patrick Hornqvist retired, Giovanni Smith, Ratko Gudas, who was a big player for them, and Mark Stahl. Listen, I Chris and Zach are going to disagree with me. We've already had this conversation, but I'm going to just say this now. Florida's not making the playoffs. They're finishing sixth in the Atlantic. And I'm telling you this right now. They're probably one of, if not the most overrated team in the league. And the reason I believe that is because, listen, I know playoffs are very impressive, and I get it, and I understand it, and Florida did well. And I'm not taking away from playoff success because at the end of the day, what they did was very impressive. And to do it against, three of the best teams in the Eastern Conference in the Leafs, Carolina, and Boston is great. But this is a team that last year let in a lot of goals, scored a lot of goals, but defensively they were never very good. They kind of were bailed out a lot by the fact that they could score goals in bunches, kind of like the Buffalo Sabres a little bit, only that Florida had a little bit more talent. Now, look, their forward core is good, right? Sam Reinhart, Barkov, Verhage, Bennett, Kachuk, like these guys are all beasts. Anton Lundell's a big player. For me, I think it stems down to two things. One, is Bobrovsky going to be able to do it for a full season? And two, what's their decor going to look like, right? Because no Aaron Ekblad, no Brandon Montour for at least the first 3 months of the season, which is going to take a big toll on this team. Not only just physically, but also points wise and everything. I think they're not ready to take on that big load. And then who else is going to step in? You've got Gustav Forsling, okay. You got Nico Mikkola, okay. OEL, okay. Like these are all guys that are depth guys, but they're not guys that are going to thread the needle for you, right? And so I think that that's a big thing for Bobrovsky, for the team for Florida, and then also for Bobrovsky. I mean, he makes $10 million a year. He's also 34. I know he had a good playoff run, but this regular seasons is a different beast. And then you have Anthony Stolarz, who was, hit or miss last year with Anaheim. So for me, I think, listen, I think Florida's got a good offense. They're going to score goals. They're going to have struggle. They're going to struggle to keep the puck out of the net. And ultimately, I think this year, more than ever, I think they're going to be exposed for the fact that they're just not as good as people give them credit for. And they're going to be finishing sixth. So that's my opinion. Florida fans, you can hate me in the comments. I don't really care. I've shared that opinion since the season ended. I think people talk too much about how good they were and not about how realistic it was that as much as it was impressive, it's not sustainable, unfortunately. So that's my opinion on it.
Okay, so my opinion, you know, I love the Florida Panthers and what they've done these last couple of years, and really, Bill Zito it's probably the best thing that's ever happened to him in the past decade. Great GM, built a contending team last year, a team that went all the way to the playoffs, made the playoffs barely, and eliminates the Boston Bruins in 7 games. There was a comeback there. They were down 3-1 in the series, and they went on a magical run like the Montreal Canadiens back in 2021, 2020, 2021, and same thing like Price. Bobrovsky finally finds himself playing like prime Bobrovsky, and they get to the finals, and then they lose. This is a team that's going to be without Montour and Ekblad to start the season, and just looking at their decor right now, very shaky. Yes, I do believe that Gustav Forsling and Josh Mahura are very underrated defensemen, but as a top pairing, that is not the top pairing that you want to have. Then you have Oliver Ekman Larson. This guy just got bought out. Yes, he's a good, leadership veteran to have on the team in the locker room or whatever, but to play second pairing minutes, that guy barely did any of that in Vancouver. He was they were trying anything possible to scratch the guy towards the end of his tenure with the Vancouver Canucks. Now he's gonna be given second line pair minutes. Or Dmitry Kulikov, who Kulikov these last couple years has been bouncing around like a journeyman, and he's basically a sixth and seventh defenseman, and he's playing in a second line role here. Then you have Nico Mikola, who's an underrated defenseman in my opinion. I think he perfectly fits in that third pairing role. Mike Riley got bought out. The guy was playing in the AHL. He was not playing with the Boston Bruins at all. He had one good season with the Boston Bruins, and after that, he fell off. They buy him out because he fell off, and he's not the offensive defenseman that they hoped for. So their decor is garbage. Okay. And their goaltending is questionable because we don't know if Spencer Knight is going to be their backup goalie to start the season. And as of right now, we have Anthony Stolarz, who, in my opinion, is an AHL goalie. And you have Sergei Bobrovsky, who's the most inconsistent and highest paid goalie in this league with on the worst contract. Even though, yes, he went on a magical run and he took back his spot from Alex Lyon. The fact that Alex Lyon was outplaying Bobrovsky, who Lyon is an AHL goalie or a bona fide backup goalie, whatever you want to consider him at this point. Um, that's very questionable. And now you're heading into the season with a lot of key injuries. Yes, their offense, top notch. You add a guy like Evan Rodriguez on a great long-term deal. He's one of the most underrated centermen in
Deserves
the
it.
league, but he's playing as a winger in this case because you look at their center court. There's no space for Rodriguez to being playing center, so they move him to the wing. So he's gonna be playing. I guess he's Anthony Duclair's replacement at this point. Hornquist, injured all of last year, so he retires. But in his prime, he was good. But they have a good offensive core, and with Denisenko potentially making the team, that's music to their ears in terms of prospects. And Matthew Tkachuk, will he be able to repeat the season that he had last year? Well, last year was probably one of the best seasons I've ever seen from a player in the last 5 years. So it's going to be hard to replicate. But yes, I do believe he'll be able to, get close to 100 points again. Sam Reinhart, very good secondary scorer. You have Carter Verhaeghe, one of the most underrated players in the league. You have Sam Bennett. He didn't have the best season like he did this first year with the Florida Panthers when he got traded from Calgary to Florida, but he still did his job. You have Anton Lundell, a very good player who's finding his way into the NHL and finding consistency to his game. Nick Cousins has been a good fit with the Florida Panthers. You have Ryan Lumberg as well. You have Lawrence, who's I guess average. The offense is not the problem here, but because of the defensive problems and their goalie problems, that's what's going to outweigh their offense, unfortunately. And the offense is not going to be able to carry the defense and the goaltending. And this team is going to be playing catch up in the second half of the season because they don't have Ekblad and Montour, who are, their best defensive defensemen and their best offensive defensemen. So I don't have Florida making the playoffs because of that. It's
Sam,
too
you changed your
competitive.
opinion.
Atlantic. It's going to be impossible for them to catch up.
Then you change your opinion. Zach,
Okay.
what do you think?
So recent reports have said that Matthew Tkachuk may be ready for the start of the regular season, which is enormous for them. He's the heartbeat of this team, as we saw all of last season and throughout the playoffs, and he's a bona fide superstar. And like you mentioned in depth, Chris, is if you look at their top four lines, there's depth all over the place. There's playmakers, and there's players that that have a lot of skill and that transition really well. As we saw in the playoffs for them, I thought a big asset for them, especially in the series, the first two series and the series most notably against Toronto, is that this team under Paul Maurice, and even prior to Paul Maurice, especially in the regular season the year prior, is that when this team is on its game, their defense are moving the puck quickly and they're transitioning from defense to offense, and they're allowing their skilled forwards to maneuver tight windows to create a lot of 5-on-5 chances. And this team is just a 5-on-5 monster when they're on their game. But then you look at their decor, and you don't have Aaron Ekblad and you don't have Montour for the start of the season. And Montour and Ekblad, two playmaking defense, puck moving defensemen, were a big part in that brand of hockey for them. I know they tried to replace them in the aggregate, it looks like, with an Oliver Ekman-Larsson, who looks like he's kind of finished, Dmitry Kulikov, who, just like Eric Johnson, is probably closer to retirement, and a Mike Riley, who does have puck moving ability, but who's failed to play consistent top four roles throughout his entire career. So it's really patchwork what they're doing with this decor, and I think they're going to really struggle for the first at least 2 months of the regular season, and then it's a question of, can they close the gap later? And I'm going to disagree with you guys. I think the goaltending is going to be really good with Bobrovsky and Spencer Knight, especially with Spencer Knight giving Bobrovsky a run for his money, and probably going to bring out the best of Bobrovsky if they're both competing in this healthy way. So I think it's going to be a brutal October, November, December, halfway through December potentially. But then when we hit the new year, I think this team is going to really take off. And I see them as a potential wildcard team. I agree with you guys that the Atlantic Division may see 5 playoff teams this year, and I think they're one of them for all of those reasons.
That's definitely very interesting. I think for me, I think Florida is just one of those teams that, just like I said, the injury bug is going to kill them. But moving on to obviously, the Montreal Canadiens, the ones, the city that we're all three of us are from. So for the Montreal Canadiens, this is going to be very interesting for the Canadiens because, I think they've improved. People might not say that they have. But if you look at just their arrivals versus their departures, I mean, listen, they got rid of Mike Hoffman. They got rid of Jeff Petrie to some extent. They got rid of Joel Edmondson. They got rid of Jonathan Drouin. They got rid of Rem Pitlick. Like, they got rid of a lot of guys that, were just not good enough. Dennis Gurianov as well. And they re-signed Cole Caulfield. They brought in Raphael Harvey-Pinard as well. They re-signed him. They brought in Gustav Lindstrom. I know the Canadiens are not a very good team on paper. They traded for Alex Newhook, who I think is a really good and underrated player. But Montreal's young. They're a young team. Suzuki, Caulfield, Doc, Newhook, like I mentioned, Raphael Harvey-Pinard. All these guys are going to play big roles for the Canadiens. They're going to be important parts of this team moving forward. And then, obviously, if you look at this team just defensively, Matheson, really good, named assistant captain. Good for him. Savard, Jordan Harris, Justin Barron, Kaden Gooley, Jonathan Kovacevic, all guys that are pretty young and can still develop. And then obviously you have Chris Weidman as your 8th defenseman with potentially as well David Reinbacher, who could crack the team. And then you have 3 goaltenders in Casey DeSmith, Montembeault, and Allen. Listen, for Montreal, like, defensively, they're still young. That I just don't think that they're going to be at a point where they're going to be able to compete with some of the other decors in the league. But it doesn't mean that they're bad. It just means that they're not as experienced as the other teams in the league. And then if you look at the goaltending situation, I mean, look, Jake Allen likely becomes the backup with Montembeault being the starter. And then obviously, Casey DeSmith likely gets traded. It's going to be one of those years again for Montreal. It's going to be competitive. It's going to be fun. they're going to see a lot of young talents go in and potentially have some career years. Maybe Caulfield hits 40 this year for the first time in his career. Slavkovsky, they're looking for a bounce back out of. And if they can get some guys on trade bait like Sean Monahan and potentially even David Savard as well, that could be potentially trade bait, and Jake Allen, and see what they can get for Casey DeSmith, they might be able to make some moves. But I don't think Montreal is going to do much this year. They're probably going to be one of the worst teams in the East, and that's okay too. That's fine. They're in a rebuild. They admitted it. Their owner admitted it. So not expecting too much from Montreal, but I think it's going to be a fun team to watch, and it's going to be exciting to see what they do every night. And being a Habs fan, seeing what Marty St. Louis has cooked up, at least for these young guys, is going to be interesting. So that's kind of my opinion. 8th place in the Atlantic, not better than that. Although I do think their forward core and their D core is as good as Detroit's, or maybe a little bit better. I just don't think that they're going to get there. I think Detroit's going to squeak it out because they have a little bit more experience, and that's about it. So that's my brief and small opinion on the Canadiens. I mean, I don't think there's anything else to really add on my end other than the fact that they're going to just be the same thing as last year, but they're good, and I'm excited to see what the future holds for this team.
Yeah, so Cole Caulfield, being healthy is a plus for the Montreal Canadiens. Nick Suzuki playing, the way that he played last year, but not even having like half of these players on this team because everyone was injured. That's going to be a plus for Nick Suzuki. Kirby Dach had a really good start with the Montreal Canadiens last year. Good bounce back year for him. Josh Anderson being Josh Anderson, the powerhouse that he is. Alex Newhook is going to be the new kid in town, and there's a lot of promise surrounding his game. And just a guy that just didn't work out in Colorado because there's a numbers game. There's a lot of highly talented players, and he was never being given the opportunity to excel. So he's gonna have that opportunity in Montreal. You have Juraj Slavkovsky, who a lot of people were disappointed with his game being a first overall pick last year. He's a guy that I think is going to be way more ready this year, physically and mentally. Had some flashes of you know, being a
Brilliant.
yeah, brilliance, yes. But unfortunately, couldn't do that consistently, and then he hurts himself too. Sean Monahan is coming back, so that's a great addition. He was really good at the Montreal Canadiens for the small sample that was shown last year until he got hurt. Raphael Harvey Pinard was the standout in my opinion last year. Came out of nowhere and just stole the show and was playing alongside Nick Suzuki while Cole Caulfield was healing. There's still a couple guys that do need to get traded on this team, like Christian Dvorak. You have Yoel Armia as well. Those are two guys that are still from the previous regime that need to be traded, but their contracts prohibit that from happening. Dvorak will not be healthy to start the season, so I expect a guy like Liash Anderson or maybe Yolonen making the team in terms of offense. Maybe even a guy like Joshua Roy might make the team. But looking in terms of their offense, very promising for years to come. And I think this is going to be a very exciting team once again to watch in terms of the offensive end. In terms of defensive end, a good mix of young guys and, veterans. Yola Edmondson is gone. So that opens up a spot for a rookie, or not a rookie, but a youngster to play a lot more. There's going to be a logjam of defensemen once again. You have Chris Weidman, who I don't even see cracking the lineup. I think he's like a 6th or 7th defenseman, in my opinion. Might even get traded. You have Jacky, Gouli, Kovacevic, Harris, who are the young core. You also have guys like Justin Barron, who came in the second half of the season last year due to injuries, and he did very well as well. So there's that to consider. You guys have Reinbacher, you have Logan Mayu, Lane Hudson, who could crack the lineup at any point in this season or next season or any year to come in the future. They're probably gonna have one of the best and most exciting defensive cores in the league for years to come. And, I think we already have a sample size right here of what the Montreal Canadiens are going to have for years to come. And in terms of their goalie situation, Montembeault, I see him as a starter. Backup Allen, they're going to find a team for Casey DeSmith to get traded to because he's a capable NHL goaltender. Unless, we get shocked and Allen is the one that gets traded, but I highly doubt that. I see the Canadians missing the playoffs, but once again, they're going to be exciting to watch. And yeah, this is going to be a team that has a lot of promise, but they're just not there yet.
Yeah, to round things off, I think this is going to be another growth year for the Canadians. And I think something that is of utmost importance for them is that Martin St. Louis is still the coach, because he really resonates with the players, was a player himself, gives their offensive players and their rookies at any position a lot of independence to really find their stride in this team. Like he's mentioned in interviews, this team has a structure, but their structure is working their structure around everybody's good qualities, and that's how they round out their team. And with players like Cole Caulfield getting a lot of freedom, yes, I know you guys mentioned he could have a 40-goal season. I think that's very plausible. And two other guys that I'd like to mention, Yurov Slavkovsky, I think in year two, more physically mature, more adept to the pro game in North America. I think he could become a real difference maker for them this year. And I look at a player like Caden Gooley, who started off the year so great last year before getting hurt, and he could be another one who takes a step forward and establishes himself as a top four. And look, they have so many great defensive prospects. It's just about getting the right guys in at the right time and finding the right mix in terms of their deep pairings. Logan Mailloux, who obviously had that incident when he was 18 years old, but who had a tremendous season in the OHL last year, is going to be transitioning potentially to the pro level, depending on how he does in training camp. I see him as somebody who has a really high ceiling, and that could help the Habs decor down the line, and hopefully he gets some games. And looking at it now, their offense from top to bottom, I see a lot of depth there, especially at the center position. Probably, if you compare them to a team like Detroit, it's probably better, but their decor is still that question mark. But there's a lot of growth that is to be made. Their goaltenders, Montembeault, Allen, and Casey DeSmith, just to add on to what you guys said, I think they're going to trade the hot hand and who gives them the most value in terms of draft picks, because this is a team at the end of the day that's still trying to load draft picks so they could create their infrastructure and add those pieces in the draft that are going to be future difference makers for this team. Because looking at them, they still have a lot of needs, but there is a lot of promise there, and I see them rounding out the Atlantic Division and finishing in 8th place.
Yeah, and just obviously to kind of just move on from this as well, I like we said with Montreal. I mean, look, there's going to be some excitement, but another team that I think is going to be very exciting, and Zach's favorite team, and I think this is the year for them. I really do. They added some good pieces. I know they traded the Brinket. They brought in Kubalik. They brought in Vladimir Tarasenko. They brought in Eunice Corpusalo, who, listen, I think is an overpaid contract. I do, and I said that. I don't know what they're going to expect from Corpusalo, but kind of what I was explaining internally, at least to the guys, is that Corpusalo is that type of guy that can steal you games, but he's also the type of guy that can lose you a lot. And I think that if they can get the version of Corpusalo that can steal them games, and he can be the Corpusalo that he was in the playoffs when he was in the bubble, I think Ottawa's going to be in a very good position. If they get the Corpusalo of 2 years ago with Columbus, then they're in trouble. So I think for Ottawa, it's going to be very interesting. Look, their top six is fantastic. Probably one of the best top six in the league. And if all of them stay healthy, they're going to score goals. That's not a question. The question mark with Ottawa on that third line is going to be, where's Shane Pinto? Is he going to be signed? He's yet to receive a contract. I think he does get re-signed before the season starts and plays for the Senators. And they have a young team. Look, Zach McEwen, Mark Kastelik, and Matthew Joseph are good fourth line guys. They've got Ridley Gregg. They just signed Jake Sanderson on the back end as well, who I think is a really good defenseman. Now that contract might be hefty right now, but I think for what he might turn out to be, I think it's not going to be as bad as people think it might be. And look, they've got Chikrin and Shabbat. Ottawa's just well-rounded. They really are. They've built a very good team, and the team is young. It's young enough that they're able to compete and still be at a point where they might surprise some people. I have them, in my opinion, fourth in the Atlantic. I think I have them just behind the Bruins. I have them squeaking into the playoffs comfortably. Now, I know that the fourth and fifth technically are wildcard positions. I think they're going to be in the battle with the Boston Bruins there for that third position in the Atlantic, but I do ultimately think the Ottawa Senators finish fourth and in a wild card spot. Just because I'm not sure about Corpusalo, and that's the only thing that I'm going to say about Ottawa is if Corpus, like I said before, if Corpusalo can be bubble Corpusalo, the Sens are fine. And also if he can stay healthy, and with Anton Forsberg as their backup, I'm happy with Forsberg. I think he's a good goalie. Just a matter of him staying healthy. But Ottawa, underrated team. I think they're going to be a very good team this year, and I have no doubt about that. So, Zach,
I
I hope you enjoyed that.
well, I'm gonna go first because I know. I mean next because I know Zach's gonna have a lot to say. I have the Ottawa Senators finishing third in the Atlantic. So this team losing the brink at everyone thought that was gonna be the worst thing ever. Well, you get Dominic Kubelik, who fits perfectly on that third line, but also opens up an opportunity to sign Vladimir Tarasenko. So they're killing two birds with one stone, and they also get assets as well, a part of that deal. Like Tim Stutzel said, if you don't want to be here, get out. The Brinkat didn't want to be here. He was not happy being played on the second line. He wanted to be a first liner. So because of that, I think the locker room, the culture knows what it has to be moving forward. When you add guys like Claude Giroux last year, you know that this team is going to be competitive for years to come. Giroux's not going to sign with a team just for the sake of signing with any team. He's going to sign with, yes, the team that he grew up watching, but also a team that's going to be competitive, that has a chance to win a Stanley Cup, because that's the main goal at the end of the day. Giroux has yet to win the Stanley Cup. You guys have guys like Brady Tkachuk, Tim Stutzel, Vladimir Tarasenko who's added, Josh Norris who's going to be healthy. Hopefully they get Shane Pinto signed. Their center core is fantastic. In my opinion, they have a lot of depth there. In terms of their secondary scoring, their elite scoring on the first line, they have everything covered. And it's never a problem when you have Dominic Kubelik playing third line, because that guy was one of the best Detroit Red Wing players at the start of last year. Okay, so if he's capable of finding his game consistently, that's going to be a huge plus for them. And in terms of the fourth line, not the best fourth line ever, but it's going to get the job done. The biggest thing here that I love about the Ottawa Senators is Jacob Chikrin to start the season with the Ottawa Senators. He has been the missing piece to that top four for years, and finally they got that done at last year's trade deadline. So looking at this top four, it's one of the best top fours in the Atlantic, and I think it's going to be very scary. And the third pairing, Eric Branstrom and Travis Hamonic, is a solid third pairing. Like Luca was mentioning before, Korpisalo is going to be the X factor here. Yes, Anton Forsberg is a good goalie, but he's had a lot of health issues. Same thing with Korpisalo. The goaltending is the X factor, ultimately. It all depends on their health and how they play. But everything else, they check all the boxes. This is going to be one of the best teams in the Atlantic, one of the most entertaining teams in the Atlantic. And I think this is going to revitalize the Battle of Ontario between Toronto and the Senators. They're, in my opinion, they're both good enough to destroy each other at any chance that they have at this point in time. They're both in a competitive mindset. They both have the players to take them to the playoffs, potentially go on playoff runs. I think it's going to be a bloodbath in Ontario this year. Yes, I know Toronto's probably going to be the best team in the Atlantic, probably finishing first, but the Sens are going to give them a run for their money this year.
So I'll take over, and I think for the first time since 2017, they'll officially make the postseason again. I have them finishing as the 3 seed in the Atlantic Division, but I think they're depending on some factors, their ceiling could even be higher. I think the sky is the limit for this team. You look at that top 6 unit; they replaced Alex DeBrincat with Vladimir Tarasenko, and they round it out perfectly with talent, grit, all you can ask for. And their top 2 power play units are going to be very loaded, considering that they have defensemen like Jake Sanderson, proven on the power play last year. You have Thomas Chabot there, and Jacob Chikrin, obviously with his great ability to shoot the puck. And they add some much needed depth, because the issue for them last year was their bottom six depth, and their bottom six was getting exposed that time. You add a player like Dominic Kubalik and you force Matthew Joseph down to the fourth line potentially, and with Ridley Gregg potentially getting full-time minutes. This is a bottom six that looks very, very competent now and that can provide some depth scoring. And they bring back Eric Brandstrom, who played great at the end of last year, and who should be very motivated to come back and prove his worth again for the Sens. And Luca, you mentioned that Korpisalo, that deal, 5 years is the term. I also agree with you that that is pretty long, given the durability of the player. But I think he's 100% an upgrade in net from what they had last year in Camp Talbot. And if he is even if he's 80% of the Korpisalo we saw get the 920 save percentage last year, the Sens need a stabilizer in the net. And if he could provide that, then this team is gonna meet all of their expectations. And he has an ex-teammate of his and junior as his tandem partner, and Anton Forsberg, who's another proven goaltender and who's had some success with the Sens. So to sum it all up, I think this team is gonna make the playoffs very convincingly. And even with average goaltending, I'm still very confident that they'll make the playoffs, given how star-studded this team looks now. And they're all young, motivated, looking for their first playoff berth in a lot of cases. Brady Tkachuk and Thomas Chabot, who've been with this core the longest. And you have so much experience in Claude Giroux and Tarasenko, who've done it before. I think everybody in this group is really motivated to take it to the next level, and I think that's exactly what they're going to do.
Yeah, and I think moving on to the Tampa Bay Lightning now, which I'm just gonna make this pretty quick because obviously, we have two teams left. But just with Tampa, I mean, look, they've added a lot of depth. Tampa hasn't really lost. I know they lost Ross Colton and Alex Killorn, but honestly, Tampa's that type of team that's just really good that it doesn't even matter that they lost those guys. Like, Tampa's going to make the playoffs. They're going to finish second. They're going to be the second best team in the Atlantic this year. And I think for Tampa, there's just, they're going to be they're going to be everywhere. They're that good. Kucherov, is going to have a good year. Points fantastic. Stamkos is fantastic. Cirelli's good. Like, their team there's just nothing weak about the Tampa Bay Lightning. Vasilevsky's going to end up playing 70 games and still being a solid goaltender. I'm not worried about Tampa. I don't really have much to say, and I know people are going to be surprised about that, but the truth be told is that everything they've done well. The only criticism I would give them is I think the Brandon Hagel contract's a little bit too long in terms of the term on it, but in terms of the actual player himself, I think he's good. And although their top six isn't as good as it was last year, I think they've added a lot more depth. And with John Cooper, he gets the best out of his players. He knows what he needs to do. He's been to three cup finals, actually. Well, 2 cup finals, but and he's done everything he possibly can. And he's won 2 Stanley Cups in 2 out of the last 4 years, because they didn't make the cup final last year. But so I think that's very impressive for Tampa. And look, we know what to expect with them. I don't see anything wrong with this team at all. And at least for the regular season, they're going to be very good. So second place for me, I think the only team that's better than them is Toronto. And that's just because I think Toronto on paper is just better. But besides that, I think Tampa's got it all. So I can't complain.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think Toronto's going to finish first and Tampa's going to finish second. Why? Well, even though they did lose some key pieces like Ross Colton and Alex Killorn, Brandon Hagel's going to step up. Connor Sheary's an underrated signing. Anthony Cirelli's been playing second line center. Nick Paul's one of the most underrated depth players there is in the league. Tanner Jeannot, he's going to have to step it up, because what I've seen with him last year once he got traded from Nashville to Tampa wasn't too impressed. So I know what he's capable of doing. If he get back into form of what he was like 2 or 3 years ago, I think he could potentially surprise a lot of people and probably be like what Yanni Gord or what Goudreau were a couple years ago on that third line. So I'm really hoping he could find this form there and consistency. They add Tyler Mott because Josh Archibald got bought out. I think that's an upgrade in my opinion. Corey Perry was getting up there in age. They had to move on from him. Um, you have Luke Glendening, who's one of the most underrated face-off takers in the league. So I think he fits that fourth line perfectly. Logan Brown, I guess, will be a prove it contract. See if he could get it done on that fourth line. He's not going to hurt anybody. But until this core gets torn to pieces or removed or old and they can't skate anymore, Tampa Bay is always going to be competitive. As long as Stamkos, Point, Kucherov, Hedman, and Sergachev are there, along with Vasilevsky, their goaltender. They're always going to be a competitive team. This team's going to finish second in the division. You look at their defense, pretty much the same thing like last year, but they add Calvin DeHaan. Hedman had a little bit of a down year last year. Sergachev was better than Hedman in terms of offensive production, but I think I think they all needed rest. Going to the finals 3 times in the last 3 years. It showed last year that injuries were taking a hold on them, and Toronto, bested them essentially. I'm not saying that they lost because of injuries and they were tired and they've been playing a lot these last couple of years, but it does play a factor. So having the offseason to rest is really going to do Tampa well. And in terms of their goaltending, Vasilevsky, probably one of the best goaltenders in the league. Not a big fan of Jonas Johansson. I think he's probably the worst goaltender in the league. He's not even an NHL goaltender, but
He's
when you
only
have
played 9 games.
yeah, but when you have Vasilevsky, anything is possible. I mean, not anything's possible, but he'll get the majority of the games the same way that Brian Elliott was. Jonas Johansson is going to be the exact same thing. He'll see playing time whenever Vasilevsky needs a break or whenever there's like a double header or whatever. But I could be wrong. But I'm just not too crazy about the backup goalie. But everything else is great. They're always. But his boy is always finding a way to keep Tampa competitive, and he's always trying to, switch the depth guys in the bottom 6 all the time, and it always has proven to work out. So I'm hoping that once again, Brisbois looks like a genius, and they're able to pull it off. But there's also, points of concern that maybe what some of these changes, maybe they might regress. But in my opinion, I don't see that happening.
Yeah, I agree with you guys that this is going to be a stable playoff team again this season, and I have them finishing also second in the Atlantic Division. They lose Alex Killorn, who was a big piece for them, especially during their playoff runs. But looking at the kind of salary he was given by Arizona, I'm like, why don't you just let the guy
It was
go? You're
by
not
the
gonna.
Anaheim Ducks, actually.
Sorry about that. It's to the Anaheim Ducks. And so why don't you just let the guy go? They always are strapped against the cap because their core has been locked up for multiple years now, and that's just not the kind of money you want to be paying an Alex Killorn on a competitive hockey team. And their core is still in place. You have 3 great centermen on their lines precisely. Point is an absolute stud and an absolute gamer. You have Cirelli on the second line, who has a great 2-way game and who could generate a good amount of offense, and Nick Paul, who's a complete overachiever and sometimes is able to get you that surprise 15 to 20 goal season on the third line, and you round it out with some highly talented wingers in Stamkos, Kucherov, and Hagel, and that decor has still got Sergachev and Hedman. I don't see why this team is not going to be competitive, and that's not to mention Vasilevsky, who's among the top 3 best goaltenders in the league and miles above most goaltenders in the league. And it doesn't really matter who the backup's going to be. If he's played 9 games before and if he's going to play 20 games this year, the 60 games that Vasilevsky is going to play is going to be completely above average. You got John Cooper, who's great coach in there, great GM, will do the right moves for them at the deadline. And I think they're a lock playoff team, top 3 in the division.
Yeah, and just moving on to the last team, and I think the Atlantic favorites, the team that dominates the regular season pretty consistently. The Toronto Maple Leafs. And look, as much as I don't like them, and my opinion on them as a team, they are the best team in the Atlantic, on paper at least, and even just in terms of the squad that they have. But they've made some good signings. Tyler Bertuzzi, Max Domi, Dylan Gambrell, Ryan Reeves. I don't like the signing, but it is what it is. Simon Benoit's a good depth guy, John Klingberg, and then you have Martin Jones, who even that one is a little bit of a question mark. But they did lose some key guys. They lost Kerfoot, they lost Bunting, they lost Achari and O'Reilly, who they acquired at the deadline. Justin Hall as well, as Luke Shen. But with the Leafs, I mean, listen, this is a team that every regular season they dominate, they do well. They're usually pretty healthy. And they've added a lot of scoring. They already have Matthews, they already have Marner, they already have Nylander. We all know how good those guys are. Tavares as well, but Bertuzzi can get you 25 goals. Max Domi can probably get you 15 to 20. And then you have Matthew Nyes, who nobody really knows what his expectations are going to be in the NHL. He was really good in the playoffs for the Leafs. And I think the Leafs are high on him. I think he's going to be a guy that's going to play in the top six. I expect him to be play a big role for them. And if you look at their depth, I mean, look, Toronto's got good depth for the regular season at least. They're able to slot guys in and out of the lineup no matter what. But it just in terms of on paper, I don't see a team that's better than them. I really don't. And so I think that's why they're going to finish first in the Atlantic. If you look at their decor, I mean, listen, again, kind of the same situation. Riley John Klingberg, listen, not the best defensively, but at that point, like you have Jake McCabe, you have Timothy Liljegren, you have Connor Timmins, and you have Mark Giordano. Like those are seven NHL defensemen and seven really good NHL defensemen for the most part. Um, I think I don't think there's really a weak spot. I would say, if anything, maybe John Klingberg's probably their weakest defenseman in terms of defensively. But besides that, I think they're okay. And then in net, I mean, look, Samsonov had a good year last year. Martin Jones struggled in Seattle, save percentage wise, got a lot of wins, but didn't really play well in those games that he won. And then you had Joseph Woll, who kind of came out of nowhere and really became an underrated backup for the Leafs. So I think, look, honestly speaking, like there is no real weakness. The only thing I would say is, look, if Samsonov goes down, you're in a little bit of a predicament in net, because I don't think Martin Jones is that great. And with Joseph Woll, I don't know how ready he is. Although last year he proved, at times, that he could be the backup and he could take the reins. But in terms of that, I mean, listen, Toronto's done a very good job. I think Tree Living hasn't been given enough credit for the moves that he's made so far. And at the end of the day, I mean, for Toronto, it's not really going to be about the regular season success. It's going to be more about the playoff success. But at least for the regular season, and that's what we're talking about right now, they're by far, in my opinion, the best team in the Atlantic, and it's just not close. Like that's just my opinion on it. So yeah.
Yeah, I think by far the Toronto Maple Leafs are going to win the division. I'm not saying they're going to win the Stanley Cup. We all know how they do in the playoffs. We're talking about the season. The season, they've always been a competitive team, one of the best teams in the league the last couple of years. Um, Austin Matthews being the highest paid player in 4 years' time. Um, you know, that's going to be, crazy. A lot of people are not too happy about that, saying that he's going to be paid more than Connor McDavid. That's always debatable. Samsonov. I think he did an exceptional job last year, but injuries took a toll on him. So if he stays healthy, they're good. Joseph Woll was a standout in the playoffs in relief for Samsonov. I think he did a very good job, and in my opinion, he should be the backup goalie, not Martin Jones. I'm not too crazy about that signing whatsoever. But again, you never know. Like if Wool, doesn't do well or Samsonov gets injured, at least they have an insurance policy with Martin Jones. Yeah, John Klimberg, who is a very good offensive defenseman, but not so great defensively. But Jake McCabe's going to be cleaning up his mess. You have Dylan Gambrell. You have Ryan Reeves to add on the fourth line with Sam Lafferty. That's going to be a very scrappy fourth line, and it's going to be very hard to play against. Tyler Bertuzzi is an upgrade on Michael Bunting, so that's great. Max Domi too. They've added a lot of grit to their team this year. Apart from Klinberg, Benoit's a guy who hits. Not the best defensively, but logged in a lot of minutes with the Ducks last year. So in terms of grittiness and offensive, stats, they added to their team on an already offensive force with guys like John Tavares, William Nylander, and uh, Mitch Marner. So, this is going to be a very scary team offensively. Defensively, not the best ever, but, pretty well balanced. And goaltender, is, in Samsonov and Will is going to be the X factor. We'll be able to take the next step forward. Is Samsonov going to be healthy? What's the case for Martin Jones here? And in terms of their key departures, I would say their biggest loss is probably Ryan O'Reilly. But again, he was a trade deadline acquisition, so it's not the end of the world. Everyone else that they lost is probably a blessing for them, apart from maybe Michael Bunting, but that's also debatable because Leaf fans did turn on him by the end of the last season. So yeah, I have Toronto winning the division next year. Well, this season, by the end of this year, whatever.
Yeah, I guess it's one of those times where we're all in agreement again. I also have them winning the division. But I wanted to start off by saying that the loss of Ryan O'Reilly, I think, is somewhat significant because when they added him at the trade deadline, it gave them the flexibility to move a guy like John Tavares, who's starting to struggle a little bit with his foot speed, to the wing, and have Ryan O'Reilly, who's a stud, top six bona fide two-way center in this league, playing that position. And I thought that gave their lineup a lot of flexibility, and having a player like him really helped them add some scoring and just help them in the postseason. And they now acquire in this past off season Tyler Bertuzzi and Max Domi, two players already mentioned that have offer a lot of grit, but also who offer a lot of talent. And Tyler Bertuzzi is probably somebody who's going to replace a lot of the skill set that Zach Hyman had and more, and could be that perfect third man for the Austin Matthews, Mitch Marner line. So I'm very interested to see how that line is going to work as a whole. I think it could be one of the most lethal lines in the NHL, and could give a boost to Matthews and Marner once again. This team on special teams is going to be probably outstanding once again. Their decor has a lot of depth to it. I don't know if this team has one number one defenseman, but they have a lot of defensemen who are serviceable and top four capable. And their goaltenders are also very serviceable. So I think for at least the regular season, this is a team that is gonna do extremely well and stay consistent throughout the year. And I think who knows what they'll do in the playoffs, but just to basically come back to what was said previously about the Battle of Ontario, having the two teams being able to slug it out and play a lot of meaningful hockey games potentially against each other is going to be very interested in. I'm excited to see if the Sens and Leafs will meet once again in the playoffs since the last time was back in 04.
Yeah, it's gonna be fun. I'm curious to see what Ottawa's gonna do, man. And just Toronto as well. Those two teams when they play each other, it's really fun. So I'm excited to see how both, and especially if both are competitive too. It's gonna be a fun little matchup for sure. But
Yeah.
Chris, I don't know if there's anything you want to do before we end it, but
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you so much, guys, for watching this episode. It was a well needed in-depth analysis on the Atlantic Division heading into the season. I hope you guys are able to stay awake throughout this episode. There's a lot of information, a lot of analysis on certain players, and more than other teams, because there's some teams that didn't really do much during the offseason, and there's some teams that literally did everything possible. But we hope that you guys enjoyed this video. We hope that we didn't piss off anybody. At the end of the day, this is just our own opinion. So I just want to clarify that. Everyone is entitled to their own opinion, and you guys are more than welcome to write it in the comment section below whether you agree or disagree. And we'd like to hear your predictions for the Atlantic Division as well. Who makes the playoffs? Who doesn't make the playoffs? And I just want to say thank you so much, guys, for watching. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. And we'll be covering the 3 other divisions very shortly. And until next time, thank you for watching. And don't forget to subscribe.